Hello everyone, welcome back to another remote sensing lecture video. And in this lecture video, I want to continue our discussion on image differencing by talking about this idea of comparing two NDVI values. So the first was from time one, and we sort of made the argument that this was a small subset of a heavily forested image. So we had relatively high NDVI values, again, NDVI ranging from -1 to 1. And then we had time two after a fire had went through, that we had actually burned off a substantial portion of vegetation in these 2 pixels, and we affected this pixel slightly. And so the first thing we did was we added 1, because image differencing, you don't want negative values because that messes everything up. So we made sure that all these values were positive by adding 1. Again, -1 to 1 becomes 0 to 2. And then we simply subtracted time 1 from time 2. So that's time 2 minus time 1. And we got these results right here. So if this all seems confusing to you, go back, rewatch the first image differencing video, at least until you get to this step. And what I want to do in this video is I want to take this output, and instead of talking about change, no change, which is how we wrapped up the previous video, I want to talk about this idea of magnitude of change. And so I'm going to slide, give ourselves plenty of room here. And what I want to do is I want to talk about, again, to recap, we're doing time 2 minus time 1, just to give ourselves a framework here. And I want to talk about this idea of magnitude of change. And so I think the best way to approach this would be to think back to when we talked about indices and we made that table where we had low, medium, high. Let's do the same thing here. Let's say we have NDVI at time 1 and NDVI at time 2, right? Try and leave myself plenty of room here. Okay, so let's sort of, for simplicity's sake, break it down into 3 categories. Right, for NDVI at time 1, you can have a low value, a moderate value, or a high value. Right, for NDVI time 2, you can have the same thing. Right, a high value, a moderate value. Make that look a little bit cleaner. Right, a moderate value, and a low value. Okay. So again, this is going to be a very similar procedure to what we went through when we talked about indices. So hopefully this sort of matrix setup here isn't going to be completely new to you. But what I want to do is I want to go through this equation, time 2 minus time 1, and talk about sort of what numbers we would expect to get and what those numbers would mean. Okay? So let's assume that we have a high NDVI at time 2, and we subtract from it a low NDVI at time 1. Think for a second about what our result would be. A high number, so again, high would be 2, moderate we'll say is approximately 1, and a low value would be approximately 0, right? Because we added 1 to NDVI. So approximately 2, approximately 1, and flip this. This would be approximately 0, approximately 1, and approximately 2. Okay? So think about what happens here. You have approximately 2, and you're subtracting approximately 1. All right, what do you get? Well, you get a value of approximately 2. Okay? So what happens if you get a high value of approximately 2, and you subtract a moderate value of approximately 1? Well, you're going to get approximately 1, right? So what do you get if you have a high value of 2 minus a high value of 2? Well, you're going to get, right, approximately 0, because 2 minus 2 is 0. Okay? Let's do moderate. What happens if you have a moderate level of NDVI minus a low level of NDVI? Well, that's going to be, right, approximately 1. A moderate value of 1 minus a moderate value of 1. You're going to get approximately 0. Now here's where we get different, right? What if we do a moderate value minus a high value? Well, in this case, right, you're going to get approximately -1, right? Because this number is less than this number, so your result is going to be negative. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. What happens if we have a low minus a low? 0 minus 0 is going to be approximately 0. What about low minus moderate? Well, in this case, that's going to be approximately -1, right? Because 0 minus 1 is -1. And again, these are approximate, right? Because these are sort of approximately moderate values, approximately high values. And then what about low minus high? Well, that's going to be, right, approximately -2. Okay? So now we sort of have these categories. And I want to go back in and I want to think about, what do these numbers mean? All right, what does a value of approximately 2 mean? Well, a value of approximately 2 means that we had a high NDVI at time 2 and a low NDVI at time 1. Well, what does that mean? If a high NDVI means lots of quality vegetation, and the low NDVI means virtually no vegetation, right? A value of 2 means we have vegetation at time 2, we don't have vegetation at time 1, right? This means lots of growth, right? Because high at time 2 minus low at time 1 means lots of growth. We have lots of vegetation in a place where we didn't have vegetation before. Okay? So what about this one? What about a high at time 2 and a moderate at time 1, giving us a value of approximately 1? Well, this means we had a lot of vegetation here, and we had a decent amount of vegetation here. So we gained a little bit of growth, right? So approximately 1 means a little bit of growth. Or a little bit of improvement in the quality of the vegetation, right? So what about a value of 0? Where do we see 0? Well, we see 0 when we have a high minus a high. We see a 0 when we have a moderate minus a moderate. And we see 0 when we have a low minus a low. So what does that mean? It basically means we didn't change, right? So values around 0 basically mean no change. So what does a value of -1 mean? Well, -1, where do we see negatives pop up? I'm gonna have to slide up just a little bit so we can see the table. All right, where do we see negatives pop up? Well, we see a -1 pop up when we go from having high vegetation at time 1 to having moderate vegetation at time 2, or when we go from having moderate vegetation at time 1 to low vegetation at time 2. So in both of these cases, right, high to low, or high to moderate and moderate to low, right, in both cases, we've degraded the quality of the vegetation, right? So values approximately -1, right, that would indicate that we have a slight degradation. In the quality of vegetation. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And then finally, what would -2 be? Well, we get -2 when we go from having a lot of vegetation at time 1 to having virtually no vegetation at time 2. So that would be, right, that would be strong degradation. Right, that would be strong degradation. Because think about it, we had lots of vegetation and now we have no vegetation. That's how we get -2. Okay? So take a second, think about how we got these, think about why we're saying they mean what we say they're meaning. And then let's bring this back over here to the context of our difference image here. I'm going to slide over just a little bit. Hopefully we can see everything. Okay, perfect. So again, take a second, make sure that you really understand these values here. And let's take a look at what we have. So this pixel right here, right, we said was 0.2, so that's low, right? It's almost 0 at time 2, minus 1.8, which is high in time 1, right? Gave us a value of negative 1.6, which is going to be pretty close between 1 and 2. So we would, or sorry, between negative 1 and negative 2. So if you think about that, right, we said that this was high quality vegetation. We said this had been burned. And our result is saying we have degradation. So hopefully that makes sense, right? We've burned these pixels, so we would expect them to be strong negatives, indicating that we've sustained some sort of damage. So this is what I mean when I say magnitude of change, right? Not only are we saying change occurred, but we're able to give some sort of magnitude, right? We can say a lot of degradation or a lot of growth. We can say it's a little bit of degradation or a little bit of growth, or we can say no change at all. Right? And again, NDVI is just a good example because it's easy to follow through, but you could do this with actual reflectance values. You could do this with different types of indices. Again, NDVI is just an example. This is just an example. Hopefully you understand the theory behind it so that you could apply these concepts to other types of image differencing. Thinking about what the value means, when you difference them, what the result means, and maybe come up with some sort of categories to sort of help you wrap your mind around the magnitude of change. So I know this was a lot. I encourage you to pause the video, go back, rewatch the parts you're confused about, and as always, please reach out. Thank you.